Bill Laimbeer, the villain who never changed. Bill Laimbeer walked into the WNBA with the same energy he left the NBA, hated, confrontational, and unapologetic. With the Detroit Shock, he turned a struggling franchise into a dynasty. 3 titles, a culture of toughness. But his style? Old school intimidation. Players either thrived in his no-nonsense system or hated every second of it. When Laimbeer took over the Las Vegas Aces, the pattern repeated. He stacked the roster with stars, pushed them to play bruising basketball, and didn't care about aesthetics. Wins came, sure, but so did tension. By the time Becky Hammon replaced him, fans and players alike treated it like a breath of fresh air. Laimbeer's legacy? A winner with rings, but also the face of WNBA coaching hostility. He never tried to be loved. He thrived being hated. The question is, was the hate respect or resentment? Pokey Chatman, scandal that never left. Pokey Chatman's career was tainted before she even coached a WNBA game. Resigning from LSU after allegations of inappropriate relationships with players, she carried that baggage forever. In the WNBA, her coaching resume, with the Chicago Sky and Indiana Fever, never shook that shadow. Even when she made playoff runs, the narrative stuck. Players respected her basketball mind, but the trust factor? Always complicated. Fans viewed her through scandal first, coaching second. By the end, her name in headlines brought eye rolls instead of credibility. She may have been capable, but the perception never changed. She wasn't hated for X's and O's. She was hated because the court was never the only story. And in sports, perception sometimes overshadows reality. Ann Donovan, the cold genius. Ann Donovan is a Hall of Famer, a gold medalist, a champion. But as a coach, the love wasn't universal. Her style was structured, disciplined, and often rigid. With Seattle, she won a title in 2004. Nobody can take that away. Yet behind closed doors, players described her as distant, almost cold. Not a player's coach, more like a boss with no room for negotiation. Later stints with the New York Liberty and Connecticut Sun only deepened the split perception. Fans praised her credentials, but many players didn't enjoy playing under her system. Donovan wasn't the worst coach, but she's remembered as one of the least beloved. Her genius was undeniable, her warmth missing. Sometimes greatness on paper doesn't feel great in reality. Michael Cooper, Showtime that didn't translate. Michael Cooper came into the WNBA with Hollywood attached to his name. Showtime Lakers legend, defensive ace, energy guy. But coaching in the WNBA is not about past fame, it's about adapting to the league. Cooper's stints with the Los Angeles Sparks and Atlanta Dream had moments of success, but the relationships often soured. His style leaned heavily on his NBA pedigree, and that rubbed players the wrong way. Not everyone wanted to hear "I played with magic" as the selling point. The Sparks had talent, but Cooper's coaching never maximized it for long. In Atlanta, it was more of the same. Flashes, but no staying power. He wasn't hated for scandal or failure. He was hated for leaning on a reputation that never fully translated. In the WNBA, you earn respect here, not from your NBA resume. Dan Hughes, the stubborn tactician. Dan Hughes carved out a long career in the WNBA. San Antonio, Seattle, always the steady hand. But steady doesn't mean beloved. His reputation was clear. Loyal to his veterans, stubborn with his rotations, and unwilling to bend even when the game demanded it. In Seattle, he won a championship in 2018, but ask Storm fans about his rotations and you'll get an earful. Younger players often sat while Hughes leaned on his people. That created resentment in the locker room and frustration in the fan base. He wasn't fiery like Laimbeer or scandal-stained like Chatman. He was the coach who drove fans mad with decisions that felt locked in stone. Hughes lasted because he knew the game, but hated because he rarely listened. Sometimes consistency is a gift, sometimes it's a curse. For Hughes, it was both. Cheryl Reeve, the champion control freak. Cheryl Reeve is one of the most successful coaches in league history. 4 titles with the Minnesota Lynx, multiple Coach of the Year awards, a Team USA appointment. On paper, she's elite. But ask around and you'll hear another side. Reeve is known for control, absolute control. From rotations to media narratives, she runs everything with a firm grip. Some players buy in because winning erases tension. Others, they chafe. Her intensity has led to clashes, and her approach to criticism, both public and private, has left bruises. Fans adore the rings, but rivals and even some Lynx players have called her suffocating. She's respected, yes. Loved, not always. Hated? Enough to keep her name in debates. Reeve is the proof that dominance doesn't guarantee universal admiration. Richie Adubato, the old guard dinosaur. Richie Adubato was one of the first faces of WNBA coaching. He led the New York Liberty through multiple finals runs. But while he represented the league's early growth, his style aged badly. Defense first, grinded out, limited creativity. He demanded discipline but rarely adapted. By the mid-2000s, as the game evolved with faster pace and modern spacing, Adubato's methods felt prehistoric. Players grew frustrated with the rigidity. Fans groaned at the lack of offensive spark. Even his biggest supporters admitted his system had an expiration date. Richie wasn't a villain like Laimbeer or a controller like Reeve. He was a coach who stuck around too long. And when you can't evolve, the hate builds fast. Legacy coach or not, he became the symbol of an era the WNBA was ready to leave behind. Brian Agler, the reluctant winner. Brian Agler has 2 championships on his resume, one with Seattle in 2010, one with Los Angeles in 2016. He should be celebrated, but Agler is not remembered for joy. He's remembered for his grind, defense first, star second. Locker rooms under Agler often felt joyless, even when banners were raised. In LA, despite having Candace Parker, Nneka Ogwumike, and Kristi Tolliver, the style was defense-heavy and freedom-light. The Sparks won, but tension never left. His exit proved it. Even with a title, relationships soured. In Dallas, it only got worse. Young players bristled under his system, and the wings stagnated. Agler's problem wasn't incompetence. It was his inability to make winning feel good. Fans hated watching his slow style. Players hated being boxed in. Agler had rings, but no love. Winning wasn't enough. Not with him. Fred Williams, the endless interim. Fred Williams is the definition of always around. He's had multiple head coaching stints: Utah, Atlanta, Tulsa, Dallas, Los Angeles. And yet, no lasting legacy. Why? Because wherever he goes, chaos follows. Williams is often the emergency hire, the interim solution, the guy brought in when a team collapses. That gives him jobs, but never long-term trust. Players sometimes respect his steadiness, but his teams rarely elevate. In Dallas, it was constant underachievement. In LA, he was just a stopgap. Fans grew tired of seeing the same results, teams with talent going nowhere. The hate comes from fatigue, from always being in the picture, but never delivering anything meaningful. Williams' career is proof that staying power doesn't equal respect. Sometimes it just means overstaying. Lin Dunn, loud, proud, and polarizing. Lin Dunn is a WNBA lifer, and she makes sure everyone knows it. Her passion is undeniable. Her resume includes a title with Indiana in 2012, and she's been an influential voice in women's basketball for decades. But that passion? It cuts both ways. Dunn's coaching style was blunt, confrontational, and old school to the bone. Some players thrived under her discipline, others flat out clashed. Off the court, her outspoken nature made her a lightning rod. She never bit her tongue, even if it burned bridges. Fans respected her knowledge, but plenty rolled their eyes at her refusal to evolve. Lin Dunn wasn't hated because she failed. She was hated because she was loud enough to make sure if you disagreed, you'd remember it. Mike Thibault, the almost guy. For years, Mike Thibault was the winningest coach without a ring. He piled up regular season wins with Connecticut and Washington, but when the playoffs came, collapse after collapse. His Sun teams were loaded: Taj McWilliams-Franklin, Nikesha Sales, Lindsay Whalen, Asja Jones, yet never broke through. The label stuck. Fans grew resentful. By the time he finally won a championship in 2019 with the Mystics, the reputation was already cemented. Too many missed chances, too much heartbreak. Even with that title, Thibault's playoff history leaves a bitter taste. He's respected, but hated by fan bases who lived through those near misses. For some, he'll always be the guy who should have won more. And in sports, should've is the most hated word of all. Gary Kloppenburg, the perennial assistant. Gary Kloppenburg is the rare coach who's won titles, without ever truly being the guy. Twice he stepped in as Seattle's interim head coach, in 2018 when Dan Hughes was battling cancer, and again in 2020 during the bubble. Both times, championship. And yet, nobody ever handed him the reins permanently. Why? Because Kloppenburg is seen as an assistant, not a leader. His resume outside those interim runs, failed stints in Tulsa, forgettable stretches elsewhere, left fans skeptical. Players respected him, but rarely rallied around him. It's almost worse than being a bad coach, being good enough to step in, but never trusted to run the show long-term. Fans resented his stop-and-go impact. Kloppenburg won rings, but somehow left with no legacy. That's why his name still stirs mixed emotions. Steve Key, the Chicago collapse. Steve Key's run with the Chicago Sky is remembered for one thing: wasted potential. He inherited talent: Sylvia Fowles, Candace Dupree, Gia Perkins, but the results? A mess. The Sky never reached the playoffs under him, and the team constantly looked like it had no identity. Key doubled as head coach and GM, which only made things worse. Bad roster moves, questionable rotations, and a glaring lack of progress defined his tenure. Fans turned on him quickly, frustrated with a team that should have been contending but instead sat at the bottom of the standings. By the time Pokey Chatman replaced him, it felt like relief. Steve Key isn't remembered as controversial. He's remembered as incompetent, and sometimes that's worse. Julie Plank, the firing nobody understood. Julie Plank's time with the Washington Mystics was short but unforgettable. She took a struggling franchise, gave it structure, and led them to a franchise best record in 2010. Then, fired. No warning, no explanation. Mystics fans were furious. Players were blindsided, and the bitterness stuck. To this day, her firing is considered one of the most baffling front office moves in WNBA history. But Plank wasn't universally loved either. Her system was defense-heavy, often grinding games to a halt, and some players bristled at her strict rotations. The firing turned her into a sympathetic figure, but the style of play left its critics. Julie Plank was hated less for who she was, and more for what her team looked like under her. Ann Donovan, Liberty Stint, the disconnect. Ann Donovan deserves her second entry because her New York Liberty years were that rough. Hired in 2009, she was supposed to steady the ship. Instead, the team regressed. Her structured, rigid coaching clashed with the Liberty's personnel, and fans quickly grew impatient. Donovan never seemed to connect with New York stars or its fan base. The energy felt flat, the results mediocre, and her presence more authoritarian than inspiring. Liberty fans are passionate. They want a coach who matches their fire. Donovan didn't. Instead, her tenure is remembered as lifeless, a misstep for both her career and the franchise. For someone with Hall of Fame credentials, her Liberty years are still a sore spot. Great coach elsewhere, hated coach in New York. Mike Peterson, the interim nobody wanted. Mike Peterson's Atlanta Dream stint in 2021 is almost forgotten, but not by Dream fans. Thrust into the role after Nikki Collin bolted for Baylor, Peterson looked overwhelmed from day one. The Dream were already in chaos, with ownership drama and locker room tension, and Peterson's leadership did nothing to steady it. His rotations baffled fans, his in-game adjustments were non-existent, and his press conferences didn't inspire confidence. By mid-season, he stepped down, citing health issues. For fans, it was less sympathy and more frustration. The Dream wasted another year. Peterson wasn't hated because he was toxic or scandalous. He was hated because he was out of his depth. In the WNBA, that's unforgivable. Marianne Stanley, the stubborn throwback. Marianne Stanley is a Hall of Famer, a pioneer, and a name that commands respect in women's basketball history. But when she returned to the WNBA with the Indiana Fever in 2020, the game had already passed her by. Her old-school rigid style clashed with a young, rebuilding roster. Instead of development, there was dysfunction. Players looked frustrated, the offense looked prehistoric, and fans begged for change. By the time she was fired in 2022, the Fever were the worst team in the league. Stanley wasn't hated for scandal. She was hated because she refused to adapt. Legacy doesn't win games. The WNBA had moved forward. She didn't, and Indiana paid the price. Cory Gaines, chaos in Phoenix. Cory Gaines took over the Phoenix Mercury during the Diana Taurasi era and pushed a breakneck, fast-paced system. On the surface, it was fun. Points, highlights, excitement. But inside the locker room, players called it chaos. The system relied on stars bailing out broken possessions. When it worked, Phoenix looked unstoppable. When it didn't, It looked like street ball with uniforms. Gaines had Taurasi, Penny Taylor, and Cappy Pondexter, and still couldn't sustain success. By the time he was replaced, the narrative was clear. Too much flash, not enough structure. Fans got tired of watching the same undisciplined collapses. Cory Gaines gave Phoenix sizzle, but no steak. That's why he's remembered more for wasted talent than winning. Curt Miller, the mastermind who overthought. Curt Miller built the Connecticut Sun into contenders and later moved on to the Los Angeles Sparks. His reputation? Brilliant strategist. His problem? Constant tinkering. Miller is notorious for lineup experiments, rotation shuffles, and overthinking big moments. In Connecticut, his Sun teams made the finals twice but never finished the job. In LA, his arrival was supposed to reset the franchise, but early signs showed the same pattern. Endless adjustments, frustrated stars, inconsistent chemistry. Some players loved his detail-oriented coaching. Others found it exhausting. Fans grew tired of deep playoff runs ending with almost. Curt Miller isn't hated for being bad. He's hated for being too clever for his own good. Sandy Brondello, success that wasn't enough. Sandy Brondello led Phoenix to a 2014 championship and multiple finals appearances. She should have been untouchable, but her exit in 2021 told the truth. Winning wasn't enough. Inside the Mercury locker room, players grew frustrated with her rotations and late-game decisions. Fans questioned why a team with Taurasi, Griner, and later Diggins Smith always felt like it underachieved. Brondello wasn't fiery like Reeve or abrasive like Laimbeer. She was calm, polished, and corporate, but sometimes calm feels like passive. When Phoenix moved on, it felt like the right time. Now in New York, she faces the same scrutiny. Stacked roster, sky-high expectations, no excuses. Brondello isn't hated because she's a failure. She's hated because she's always one step short of what her talent should deliver.